Hi, I'm Simon O'Donnell. In this episode, Crash talks to a man who kept up the famous tradition of Australian wicketkeepers being tough, combative and full of cheek. A great team man and an even better family man. His underrated career consisted of 66 tests, 270 dismissals and an average of just under 33 with the bat. Of course, I talk of Brad Haddin, and his inspiring story is what cricket legends are made of.
Welcome to Cricket Legends, Brad.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Crash.
Yeah, I like the start of your story, the fact that your dad had a pub in Gundagai when you're a little fellow, and I thought there wouldn't have been much you wouldn't have seen.
No, I had a blessed childhood, actually. We grew up in the pub in Gundagai. Dad was a publican for about 8 years, but he walked straight out the backyard. You could walk across the bridge to the playing fields with my brothers. You'd think growing up a pub you would see a lot, but we were sheltered a lot from the pub life. So, yeah, now I'd like to have it.
Now, Brad, you had a great professional career, particularly for Australia, but the painful backdrop was the illness to your daughter Mia, who battled cancer for part of it. You were very private about it, but then I guess you ventilated your thoughts in your autobiography, which you basically dedicated to Mia, and it all came out. And the first paragraph of the book is she going to die? Is Mia going to die? And you lifted the lid on the turmoil you went through. It must have been, quite a big decision to write the book in the first place.
Yeah, it was. It was in 2012. I was in the West Indies, and Mia got diagnosed with neuroblastoma stage 4. It's an aggressive form of childhood cancer, and she was lucky to survive. But yeah, the reason I penned the book, I felt really uncomfortable doing it. It took a long time to get around to being able to express my feelings onto a bit of paper. But the big reason I did it in the end is because we're going to have to tell Mia at some stage as she grew what happened to her. And we thought this might have been a great tool for her to read and to see what she went through, because we're very private people, and from a personal point of view, it was hard to talk about.
You reveal small anecdotes which any parent could relate to, like when you were flying home from the West Indies, you said it was a 40-hour flight and you were terrified of turning your phone on at an airport in case of hearing bad news. Can you remember that vibe now, and how you felt and the anxiety on the plane? Yeah,
the worst thing I did leaving Barbados was check Google to get online and see what a Wills tumour is, what was neuroblastoma, and that gave me a lot of anxiety on the flight. And I said to Karina, make sure you can keep me updated when I'm in transit. And the thing I was struggling with was when I was going to turn the phone on, whether I was going to get the news Mia had passed or something had gone to extremes. So it was a tough flight. And the interesting thing about it too, because we were halfway in a West Indian tour and in transit you see a lot of cricket fans, and people were coming up to you saying, "Oh, what are you coming home for, Haz? Isn't the tour just about to start?" And it was hard to talk about. I didn't really know the full extent of what Mia was going through, and I was just hoping that she was going to be alive by the time I got back to Australia.
And I guess it affected your preparation in certain ways, didn't you? Because when New South Wales introduced an app which monitored sleep, you were really frank with them, weren't you? You said, "Look, my daughter's struggling. I just can't fulfil this." Is that right? How did that work out?
Yeah, a lot of the sports science had come into the game at the back end of my career, and there was wellness markers that you needed to keep. You give a 1, a 5 on how you're feeling, how much sleep you did, and I remember going to them and saying, "Oh, I'm not feeling this in. Judge me on what you see. Go back to a bit of old school. You'll see the way I train. You'll see the way I present at training, because if I feel that in, there'll be days where we'll have no sleep. Mia will have a turn in the hospital, and if I be honest with this, you'll never pick me." So I said, "You're going to have to judge me on what you see when I get to training." The thing that was uncomfortable for me was the Chinese whispers going, "Oh, how's Brad going? What's he doing here? Do you think he's right to play?" And I remember saying a couple of times to the coaching staff, "Ask me. If I'm not right to play, I won't be here."
That's interesting, because there was a year where you asked yourself that question. In 2012, when you were coming back, you revealed that you just thought, can I do this again? Is it really inside me? Which, that's significant because you're so strong-willed and switched on. It was a significant concession, really.
Yeah, it was. It was a hard decision to make to go back to the game. I remember saying to Karina, I'm not 100% sure whether I can do this. I wasn't worried about the skill side of things or getting myself right, as whether I could take myself to those places on the training plate that I needed to do to get better and better. And I slowly started back, and I wanted to see if I still had that drive and hunger to be the best I could be with what was going on at home. And if I didn't have that drive and I wasn't able to put them in separate areas, I wouldn't have made the comeback to play.
Wicket keepers fight so many secret battles. Like in your first test in the West Indies, you've been waiting for so long and then bang, a broken finger early in the game. Like that. Talk us through that.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. You know, I'd waited so long. I was 30 to get my crack at Test cricket, and Mitchie Johnson, who I love playing with, is in one of those spells. He just sprayed one a little bit down leg side, and I had all the excitement of my first test, and I thought I could dive and stop anything. And I remember diving, hitting the end of my finger. And as a keeper, you know if you've flicked your nail or you've got a little bump. And I went, oh, that's a break. And I turned to Huss and I said, Huss, I think I broke my finger. And thinking I'd get some sort of sympathy from Huss. And he said, I'm not keeping. So it was, there's no sympathy at all.
Now, look, you didn't mind a bit of a chirp in the field like most keepers don't. Famously, after Australia beat New Zealand in the World Cup final, you said, I had to sledge the Kiwis because they were too nice. The whole nice vibe was just overwhelming. I couldn't stand it anymore.
Yeah, it was interesting because the Kiwis got over us at Eden Park, and we turned up in the pool game about a week before, and there was just a really, really nice vibe about things. I remember walking out to the anthem, and it just, something didn't feel right. And even on the field, the Kiwis got the better of us that day, and it was just, I feel like they took us away from the brand of cricket that we played. And I remember coming into the final, talking to our psych, Michael Lloyd, and I said, I reckon they got one over us there. I reckon it was a tactic to just take our style out of the game. He said, you're right. And I said, well, we can't let that happen again. We've got to be true to the way we play. And I remember in the final, it looked like there was a bit of confrontation going on. But one of the things that happened, Grant Elliott came out and he sort of said to us, you don't think I'm good enough to be out here? And I remember saying, hang on a minute. That's a really interesting thing to say in a World Cup final. So I made sure I got that message around the field quick enough to up the tempo in what we did. If he's doubting himself for a little bit here, we can really break this game open. And it was just one of those moments where you need to jump on, recognise that moment in the game and make sure we lift at our intensity to make the game really uncomfortable for them.
You were one of the few men ever to turn down the chance to captain Australia in a test after Michael Clarke was injured in Adelaide. You were poised, you only had to say yes, basically, but you didn't. Why?
I was 37 at the time, and it wasn't a long-term, wasn't going to be a long-term answer. So I remember having a beer with Mark Taylor in South Australia after the game, and he's a board member at the time, and said, Mark, if you're looking for a captain, I'm comfortable if Steve Smith's the next. He'd been the one that we'd spoken about for a lot of time, would be the next Australian captain. And I think it might be a great opportunity give Stephen the opportunity. I'll still be there in my role as vice captain to help him through. But I wasn't a long-term fit, and we needed to move forward. And I always thought wicket keepers made the best vice captains anyway. We were good 2IC to the captain. I think a lot of wicket keepers over time were really good leaders. But from my point of view, captaincy wasn't something that I was driven to.
Michael Clarke was a polarising figure, yet there was always a feeling that you sort of got him, you understood him. Tell us your thoughts about him.
I think I was vice captain for a lot of Michael's captaincy. And I think the one thing that worked really good, Michael was really good on the ground. He was tactically a really good captain. And from the other leadership side, with getting around with the team and making sure that Everyone was enjoying what they're doing. I think that was one of my strengths. And I think from that point of view, we complemented each other in what we did. And I also didn't want the Australian captaincy. I wasn't a threat to anyone. I didn't want that job. I was comfortable leading in the way behind the scenes.
What could Michael have done better? Because his legacy for a guy that achieved a lot is not what it probably could have been.
I think it's a hard question to answer. He was a very successful captain for Australia. He won World Cups and Ashes, and sometimes as a captain you do isolate yourself from the group, and maybe at the latter end of his career he isolated himself a bit too much from the playing group, and yeah.
Be tested here, Broad now steaming in. One way. And there's another boundary.
Terrific strike. Oh, what a stroke that is.
Haddin to 94.
What a way to do it. What a 100. We might call this the second coming of Brad Haddin.
The golden stud of your career was the Ashes series when you won 5-0. It just seemed to be one of those series where all the planets aligned for you.
Yeah, going through what I went through with Mia and working so hard to get back, it was always for that moment there to get the opportunity again to play in an Ashes campaign. Till then, I'd never won one. And all I wanted to do was be a part of an Ashes winning team. I was ready as I'd ever been for that. Mia was stable. My family was around. Everyone was really excited about that series. And for me, I'd worked myself up for that moment. I thought that was going to be when I'd started to come back to play for Australia. So it was a wonderful series. I had the best seat in the house with the great Mitchell Johnson putting fear in the opposition. So everything just aligned. It was a great summer. The crowds were buzzing. The Australian public were great. And yeah, it was probably a good time to retire, actually.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Johnson tore England to shreds, and as you said, best seat in the house. Do you have a memory of English terror in that series where you saw someone you thought, you know, that guy is almost frozen stiff with fear?
Yeah, there was a couple of times. Yeah, Jonathan Trott in that first series, he'd been a thorn in Australia's side for a long time, and Mitch went after him. And I remember him like looking in his eyes, thinking, "Hang on a minute, I've got this for 5 tests, and these guys are going to be pretty ruthless." So, and we know the story with Trotty after that, where he'd gone home. But the one that stood out to me most was Graham Swan, and he's a bit of a character of the game. And he walked out to bat. Mitch was in one of his spells. The whole Gabba crowd was going, and he looked behind, and we're all behind the wicket. And I remember walking up, and he says, "This is going to be fun." And I said, "Well, we'll get used to it because this is coming at you for the rest of the summer." And Mitch went after him. We nicked him off, and yeah, it was. You could see in his eyes then, thinking this is going to be a long, long summer.
This is going to be fun. You don't hear that very often. A bloke in an Ashes make that sort of concession as if say, "Oh, I'm wobbling here," do you?
No, but it was. I kept behind some great fast bowlers like with pace, like the Tates, the Brett Lees, but what Mitchell Johnson was bowling through that summer was as hostile as I'd ever seen in my life. You could see the fear in their eyes, and we knew because I remember leading into the first test, and I was batting the nets with Ryan Harrison, and Mitch was bowling, and we were batting in pairs, and Mitch came in, and Ryan walked out of the net and said, "How'd you just face? Boof, this is not worth it. I can't see the ball." He said, "This is not funny anymore." And I remember Boof saying, "Get back in." He said, "Well, I can't." He said, "Boof, this is not fun. How'd you go down and face Mitch?" I said, "Well, I don't want to face him either." He said, "Well, you're the batter." He said, "I can't deal with this anymore." So we knew leading into that series that Mitchell Johnson was about to do something really, really special.
And of course, one of the things that you had to overcome in your career was playing in the game when Phil Hughes passed away. Of course, you were New South Wales captain, and that I mean, it must have been a moment that you know, of such grief for yourself.
Yeah, it was for everyone in the cricket world. I think from that day there, cricket lost a bit of that innocence. I know going to my boys' cricket after the weeks leading after that, you just felt like a bit of the game had lost its innocence. I remember the kids playing, asking questions, can this happen? That's not what you want to see in sport, and I think it changed the way cricket was played for a long time.
How?
I think it just lost that innocence of the game. Yes, we're out there to compete, and we all want to try to do what we can to win. But to see something like that happen that's not what everyone signs up for.
You kept to one of Australia's really underrated bowlers in Ryan Harris, and I know players who played with him have a special affection for him, don't they, for some reason?
Yeah, Ryan just summed up what playing for Australia means. He was a great competitor. His body probably let him down at the end, but I remember on the 2012 Ashes when he finally retired, he'd bowled, I think it was day 2 of the tour game. We're walking up to the hotel and he's limping, and he always limps anyway. And I remember him saying, he said, this doesn't feel right. This feels a bit different pain than what I normally does. And so he bowled the next day, bowled really well. Then got a scan and he had a broken leg. The toughness he showed, he was just someone, if you're going into battle, you want him right beside you every time.
One thing that did come out in your book was that you didn't really click with Mickey Arthur, the Australian cricket coach. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it was. It was not so much. I think Mickey, away from the game, is a nice person, but where I struggled a bit was the honesty. And at that time, I didn't have any time for bullshit in my life, to be honest, with what was going on at home and trying to get back in the Australian team. I remember coming back and playing a game against Sri Lanka in a one day. Matthew Wade was having a rest or injured. And at the end of the game, Mickey sort of said, oh yeah, you're the best wicketkeeper batsman we had. And knowing how much the Australian cap means to everyone and how hard it is to get, I found it a really weird statement and really uncomfortable. And I didn't bite back. I just sort of smiled and walked off and said that didn't sit well with me then. And then it comes to Mohali. I was called in for Matthew Wade rolled his ankle, and I played a test match in Mohali. I played the test match and getting ready for the Delhi test. Matthew Wade, he'd come back fit, so I was out of the team, and that's how life works. And as the day before getting ready, having a catch, he said, "Had you know you're the best wicketkeeper batter in the country?" And I said, "Mickey, I've had enough. You can't talk like that. The Australian cap means so much to so many people." He said, "Yeah, but when we get to the Ashes, we'll pick the right team." And I had enough, and I said him a piece and walked off. The biggest problem I had with it is that he was saying I was the best player in my position, and I've grown up trying to play for Australia, to say that we picked the best player in his position, and for him to be having a conversation that's going around a different part, I just felt uncomfortable. If I was the best player in the position, you play Test cricket for Australia, and if you're not, you don't play.
Because you flew into the tour of India just after Homework Gate and players had been sacked, didn't you? Yeah. How was the vibe when you landed? Could you sense that it wasn't good? Yeah,
it was uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable. I remember walking in and there was a lot of press around. I knew it wasn't for my return. They were walking into the hotel, and once I got in there, I found out what was going on. But it was a really uncomfortable environment to walk in. It just felt like everyone was looking over the shoulders. And I remember having a beer with Steve Rickson at the end of the Test match and saying, this doesn't feel like the Australian team that I left. It feels like everyone's walking on eggshells a bit. And yeah, it was just really different to what I'd been used to.
So you were the Australia A captain in England when Australia made the amazing decision just before the Ashes to replace Mickey Arthur with Darren Lehmann, who was your Australia A coach. Did Darren Lehmann's culture work in the Australian team? Like, it had an unfortunate ending, but did it work while you were there?
I think Darren did a great job. I thought he got us back to playing the brand of cricket that Australia were famous for. We are back learning back how to drive the game, to get into positions, not being afraid to lose cricket games. And enjoy that contest, enjoy being the one out in the middle to make the difference. I thought Darren did a wonderful job with his time with Australia.
2 years later, back to England, your career ended when you had to leave the team due to Mia's illness, and of course Peter Neville stepped in, and then he held the position. It was a challenging time for one and all, wasn't it, that?
You know,
how did it actually end? Tell us the story of the day that you knew your Test career was over.
Well, the day I knew my Test career was over was after Cardiff, when Mia fell ill again, and we had to rush down to the hospital in London, because at that time she was in remission. Everything was going in the right direction. It was just a freak incident. She had to get a shunt put in to redirect the blood. But I knew then, once Mia went back into hospital, I didn't have the fight again. I was gone. I know there was a lot of talk outside the Australian team about me coming back in, and I would have been able to play the last few Tests, but I knew once I walked away from that Test match at Lord's, I remember saying to Karina at the hospital, my time's done now with Australia. She said, no, it's family first. You'll come back in, because Cricket Australia was strong on family first, putting your family first. I said, honey, the reality of it, this is how professional sport works. You can't walk away in a middle of an Ashes campaign, and I was comfortable. I was comfortable with the decision I made, and I was comfortable with how things ended.
There were so many mixed messages and reports about how the news was broken to you, but how did you actually find out that this was the end?
Yeah, it was interesting. We were playing a tour game in Derby. So we'd just come off the Test win at Lord's. It was 1-1 in the series, and we picked the tour team for Derby. And I remember talking to Rod Marsh, and he said, you keep a bit and Nev can beat it. And I said, Rod, I've been around this game long enough. You don't need to see me keep or bat. If you made your decision, I'm not playing the next Test, just tell me, because on the flip side to that, Peter Neville hasn't kept much in the UK. So he needs some time. It's a different environment to keep. The ball moves around. He said, I've got to talk to the other selectors. I said, well, I'll wait. You go and talk to Buff, make the phone calls you have to. But I'm not playing any games. I think you know the answer, and just tell me.
Where did he go from there?
Yeah, he went to talk to Buff. Then I went and had a chat to Buff, and he said, no, you're out. We're going to go with Nev. And I said, that's fine.
We heard a whisper that you were responsible for shaping a major selection call for Australia when the selectors promoted Tim Payne into the team out of nowhere. One of their quotes privately was, Brad Haddin always said when he was around that Tim was his biggest threat. He really admired his work. And was that true? Were you sort of subtly pushing for Tim behind the scenes? And were they your feelings?
Well, at the time, we're looking for the wicketkeeper. And I remember sitting with Mark Waugh, who's selected at the time in India. I said, we're talking a lot about who's the best wicketkeeper, who's the best package to play for Australia. I said, we've actually got one right there in Tim Payne. It's just whether we're brave enough to select him.
You only played a couple of Tests with Stuart MacGill, and yet you said that was one of your big regrets. You would have loved to go on. What an interesting character and a different sort of cat, as they say.
I think Stuart made my career a bit as a gloveman. I think as a wicketkeeper, you're judged on what you do standing up to the stumps. And I was blessed at the start of my career to have Steve Rickson coach in New South Wales, who was an ex-Australian gloveman and taught me a lot about the craft. And then also I had Stuart MacGill at the SCG. And you're always in the game. You always had opportunities coming. The way the wicket was then, it was hard work to keep to MacGill on day 3 and 4 of a Shield game. And I think he made me a lot where the keeper I was. I had to be good up to the stumps. Your apprenticeship with him, and that's the disappointing thing. I would have loved to test my skills in Test cricket with him. I knew his bowling as well as anyone. I think keeping to him at New South Wales, and I would have loved the opportunity to play for Australia more, keeping to Stuart MacGill.
You're very close to Steve Smith. What can the game learn from the Smith phenomenon? Like, what do you see when you see him bat and dominate the world?
I just see a run scorer. He's just come up with a way that's been so successful for him. His drive to to be the best he can, to get himself uncomfortable at training, so when he gets out in the middle, he's in his bubble. He knows exactly what's coming his way. I've just been ultra impressed because at the start of his career, everyone wanted him to be a leg spinner and all-rounder, the next Shane Warne, and maybe be an all-rounder. And it was just the drive that he had and the self-belief at a young age to say, no, I'm going to be a batsman. This is the way I do things. And having the confidence when everyone around you is trying to pull you in a different direction, just to say, no, I'm comfortable with where I'm at. I'm going to be Steve Smith, the batsman. He's not bad.
He's not bad at all. And nor are you, Brad. Like all keepers, you spin a great yarn. Well done on your deeds for Australia and your family. And it's a pleasure to have you on Cricket Legends.
Thanks, Crash. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, mate. Terrific.